Wow, what a relief. This is Kevin James with Neil Ciceriga. Hi, Neil.
Hey.
We're trying to do a test of sorts for future live or broadcast-ready podcasts that don't involve as much editing. You know, like the rest of podcasters have been doing the last half decade.
At least, yeah.
Yeah. As I introduced myself prior, I am Kevin James, joined by...
Neil Ciceriga.
We're doing this remotely. I mean... Mm-hmm. I'm here and you're there, but we're not in the same room.
Yeah.
We wanted to test out some equipment and make sure that we could do an upcoming podcast without any hiccups. And we thought, well, to do a proper test, we really need to do this for at least 45 minutes. So, you know, just to idiot proof it to make sure that nothing breaks. So we cooked up an impromptu conversation. Neil, what are we going to be talking about today?
Just in the general special effects in movies and television.
So
mostly movies, though.
Yeah, for the most part. Now, the reason I thought we could rap about special effects extemporaneously like this is, you know, more often than not, when you and I get together, you know, a conversation comes up, a topic comes up, like, you know, it is, you know, I'll ask, okay, what movies are we looking forward to? And, you know, we're in our mid-30s, we're getting there. And there's an inherent cynicism, I think, when you hit a certain age, you know, like, oh, art isn't as good as it used to be. And people tend to think that. And I do sometimes worry that when I feel that way, because I'm a narcissist, I think that's actually the case, that movies have actually gotten worse. And this isn't to set up a counterpoint with me and Neil about movies getting worse or not. But I have noticed that movie special effects don't wow me as much as they used to, and I think that's a cocktail of knowing how the sausage is made. You know, we just, as people who've worked in a digital videography, you know, in filmmaking, you know, in all of its various forms, and being artists ourselves, we know the tools. You know, we know how certain things were done. We're film buffs as well. You know, we just follow how movies are made, and there's a lot more media out there now that shows how movies were put together. So it does demystify it. And of course, the tool sets are largely digital now. I think that's the other part of the cocktail, that it's just, you don't wonder anymore. You once said to me, Neil, we were talking about movie special effects about 15 years ago, and you said, you know, it really is just, you don't wonder anymore. You just go, oh, a computer. You know, there's no magic trick, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's possible to see an effect that was done on computers and wonder how they pulled it off, but you have to know something about how computer graphics are made, I think.
Sure.
So sometimes those effects are more of a effects person's effect.
Okay.
I think than your average, you know, audience experience. I don't know, the last, I bring this up every once in a while, but like the last special effect I watched where I had no idea how they did it was I finally saw Little Shop of Horrors a few years ago.
Great movie.
And yeah, it's a great movie. It was just one I never really caught all the way through. And when they have the full-size Audrey 2 puppet, it fills an entire room. It's there with human actors, and it's moving in such an unnatural way. I just couldn't wrap my head around how they did that in 1986. That movie has incredible special effects. There's an entire like multi-million-dollar end sequence that got cut from that movie
because it depressed test audiences. It upset them. It confused them. It's amazing.
Sure, but the whole thing feels like kind of like a response to Ghostbusters in a way.
Yeah. Not a counterpoint. Just like, okay, well, if we can get away with this, can we get away with that? Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that's such a huge feature of 80s movies that doesn't feel as intuitively understandable as the arms race of modern effects. What is the arm? What is that? Each movie was.
Are you saying, we talked about this off microphone? Are you referring to how in the 80s, every year or so, you just expected a graduation every year? Like things had to look better. Is that what you're getting at?
Every few months, really. I mean, there's back and forth movie to movie, but there's always a movie coming out, you know, through the 80s that in some way advances special effects or just does something that hasn't been done that well before.
Sure.
And That's true in the world of CGI now, but I think it's a little less noticeable, and there's just less to talk about when you do talk about it, unless you have like a really firm understanding of, of rendering times and stuff.
There was literally an arms race to make the best werewolf in 1982.
One, I think, is when
the
Howling came out. Yeah.
Have you heard the story about the Howling, like the whole, like their hearts being broken about being their lunch being eaten by American Werewolf?
No, but I can totally imagine that.
Yeah. I think American Werewolf came out second, but it was just so much more appetizing to mainstream audiences. Like it was just funnier.
Yeah.
I love the Howling, for the record. Yeah.
A really good example of that is 1989. There's like 3 different movies that are underwater for a lot of it. There's The Abyss, there's Leviathan, and then there's Deep Star 6.
Let me rephrase that for you. There's The Abyss, and then there's the rest of
there's some other
and there's a bunch of other crap. No offense.
Yeah.
But The Abyss is
came about by underwater camera technology maturing around that time, and like a bunch of producers got the same idea at the same time.
Yeah. I think you frequently hear this conversation, and I want, if people have already made it this far, if people haven't noped out, like, oh, it's a test podcast, so no Ryan, bye. You always hear the same sentiment, like 99% of the time, regarding movie special effects. Oh, CG looks bad. Practical effects are the way to go, right? And I think you and I have kicked the bucket around long enough when discussing movies and how we would do special effects or effects that we love or movies we love, that's it's kind of a reductive way to look at it. Like, practical effects have limitations, right?
Sure.
Like, think of the best transformation scene you've ever seen in a movie where like a human being turns into a monster, right? Whether it's a werewolf or the Incredible Hulk or something like that. And then think about the Mark Ruffalo Hulk transformation sequence in that first Avengers movie. Because my understanding is that the CG kind of gets less impressive as those movies go on. But there's a lot of practical reference photography done in the first Avengers movie to make. But my point being, there are just things they physically could not do without computer assisted animation. Like, people forget this. There was a lot of attempts at just straight up hand drawing special effects from like the 20s to like the 70s. If someone went to go fly in a movie before the Richard Donner Superman, half the time it was just they would take off and it would just literally become a cartoon for like 8 frames and it looked stupid as shit. Like really bad.
But cool too.
Well, cool. Okay, so that did I finish my prior point? My point being, they each have their place, right? Which sounds like a kind of a boring King Solomon way to look at it, right? But I think you'd agree, right? Like, each technique has its merits and the time that calls for its execution.
I don't know. It's effects people always say, hey, it's just another tool in the toolbox, to the point where that's just something I've heard a million times.
And you just don't see practical effects anymore. Like, you just don't, you really don't see them that much anymore. Like, it just feels like they're like, it's not worth the insurance or whatever.
The thing is, if you look at like the reels of guys like Steve Johnson or Kevin Yeager, who are still in the industry,
I love Steve Johnson,
and still doing traditional sculpture and makeup effects and stuff like that, they've continued to improve. And if movies relied on those kind of effects the way that they used to, as like kind of the central effect of a movie, or like the effect of showcasing a special effect. I'm saying the word effect too much. But that's just something that movies don't hang their hat on an effect the way they used to.
Yeah.
They're more holistic, where the entire world will be made out of CGI, and there will be a special effects and costume stuff mixed in there, because those, directors still like working with those kind of effects.
Sure.
People, a lot of the current generation of directors are our age, and they do love practical effects, but at the same time they also suffer from the same thing that every director has always suffered from, which is, I want to accomplish what's in my mind.
Yeah.
And
how's that?
I don't want to be limited in any way. And it's just, the temptation is too great to just do the impossible. And we were talking a little bit about this with Darkman recently.
Yeah.
because Sam Raimi is a great example of a director who can work at any budget and
Amazing visualist.
what
Yeah.
amazing visuals, and he clearly has a great imagination. But when you give him a huge budget, that imagination instructs the effects team to do things that don't look nearly as charming as when he's just out in the woods or playing around with models.
What's your example?
An example is the Spider-Man movies.
But do you think that's okay? So I'll say this, and this is more of a defense of Raimi rather than CG effects. Yeah. Yet again, I was born in '87. I was excited to see the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. Did you see it in theaters? We probably saw it at the same movie theater, Kingston Mall.
Probably,
right?
Yeah.
I remember the drive to the movie theater. My father was driving the Ford Bronco, bringing me and my friends to the theater, and he said, "You guys are going to love this movie." Like, I remember going to see like Superman back in the '70s, and like how exciting the effects were, and movies look so much better now. It's good. He literally said that. And the first time Peter Parker starts to web sling in that movie, even I must have been 13, 14, and even as a 14-year-old, I knew it looked terrible. Like I really had that moment of like, oh, this looks like Tony Hawk. Like, it doesn't look like the video. It really does. It's the same technique of like mapping like a texture onto a low poly model low. I mean, like, it's whatever. Like, there's some really rough looking effects, and that movie was like Oscar nominated for effects, I think. I know the second one was, but I wouldn't pin that on Raimi because that movie was in development hell for a while, different directors coming and going, and there's just no way Columbia Pictures was going to sign off on a practical effects Spider-Man. And Spider-Man physically wasn't photographable without computer-assisted animation, I would argue. Like Superman, I'm a big Superman guy. You can kind of get away with practical in-camera optics, right? Like Chris Reeve knows how to look like he's flying more than most actors. And
it's a style thing, I think. Superman, if it's done right, the director will try and lock off their shots, try and not move around too much, try and not do
I agree. I think we're
with the camera itself.
Yeah.
Whereas the directorial choices in a lot of Sam Raimi's later, more effectsy movies are they're really
he's always been
pushing
that way. It's always been his way. Always.
It has, but it's like, I don't know, it's like much more fun when he is getting crazy camera shots by putting a camera on a 2x4 and running through the woods.
Okay, now I know what you're saying. Okay. What you're saying is you're saying I think we're saying the same thing though, which is that Sam Raimi is almost a victim of the techniques that have been afforded the industry and not even him specifically. Like, I don't think he was in a position in 1999 or whatever to tell Sony, I'm not using CG to make Spider-Man web sling, because
it's not the fact that he's using CG. It's the fact that the same impulse in him that pushed him to just like go above and beyond out in the Evil Dead days with the camera movements and with the effects. Pushed him too far with CG when those limitations were removed.
I mean, I'll say this. I think I bet he storyboarded it very similarly. I think 25-year-old Sam Raimi and 35-year-old, wherever the age difference was, like, probably wouldn't have been that dissimilar creatively speaking, like how he wanted, how he envisioned it. It's just what I'm saying is I think we're really just shitting on the first Spider-Man movie special effects because they look terrible. They look bad. I've always thought that. I don't understand.
The time.
It is.
There's tons of movies that,
but they're not conservative. And the thing, the curve that we're both on here, and is that we're both saying that he's so ambitious. Especially if you listen to interviews from Bill Pope talking about working with Sam Raimi, he has nothing but kind things to say about Sam Raimi, but he always makes fun of him. Because he'll literally go he'll on the Darkman Shout Factory Blu-ray. He talks a lot about by like the third day of Darkman, they were getting so much more coverage. It was like a 50-day shoot for like a $16 million movie originally, which is crazy. They were given so much time to make that movie because the Universal wanted it to be the next Batman. But he would come in and be like, okay, Sam, do you want to do like an A shot or a B shot? And like an A Sam Raimi shot was just like dolly and rack focus. Like, it's like center frame, like here's the doorknob, like here's the gun, like but that's Sam Raimi's visual language. He wants you to like pay attention and have like, I still haven't watched Quick and the Dead, by the way, the sidebar. I really need to watch that this week because I hear the cinematography and that's off the chain too. But when
that's more of the old school. I don't think there's any real CG. Well, there's probably a little bit of like touch up in that movie.
But I don't think CG made Sam Raimi get crazier is what I'm saying. I think it's just if Sam Raimi, if he was born 20 years earlier, hypothetically, if he still made it big and was making big budget movies, his movies still would have had the same compositions and like approaches. Because I don't. Okay, you know what? Okay, I know I'm putting words in your mouth here, but I know what you're referring to with Spider-Man. It's the camera movement that's physically impossible in that movie that pisses us off, right?
Yeah.
When he's crawling up the walls the first time and he looks like a Tony Hawk video game character, and like his musculature and it's like underexposed by like 3 stops because it looked like shit and they had to hide it.
Yeah, like a bad CGI model isn't going to look better if the camera motion itself is also breaking reality. You know, it's going to look doubly fake.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, all right, the gold standard of CGI, which is Jurassic Park, doesn't all look great.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, literally in those movies. But they have rain, they mix in shots of puppets, they shoot through windows and stuff like that.
They obscure your vision a lot. They do things that like bring depth cues naturally together. Because
it anchors it in a human way. Yeah. So that you can almost imagine seeing that. And it also, I think, psychologically prepares you to see the dinosaurs as this kind of like unholy vision, so that when they are a little fake looking, it's like, well, yeah, if I saw a dinosaur, it would feel fake, wouldn't it?
Yeah. When you treat, so like, yeah, no, I wanted to get to this gear at some point, and I think this is a good opportunity for it. We grew up through that era of every year effects were just leaps and bounds. You know, sometimes multiple times a year, right? To the point where, you know, we talked earlier about Little Shop of Horrors. That movie would never have been made with the effects approach 10 years prior. It basically got to the point where all entertainment was expected to have quality special effects. You couldn't, if the genre required it. Like if you were going to have special effects movie, they better look good. You better get like Rob Bottin. You better get Steve Johnson. You better get like the big names to come in and do it. But I think the whole arms race, I guess you'd call it, you really can trace it. It's such an interesting through line from like the late 70s up to like 1993, I want to say. And it really does end with Jurassic Park. You could go from like Jurassic Park back a year prior to, we're going to talk about this on a podcast soon. I honestly think Memoirs of an Invisible Man matters in that chain. And a year prior to that, you had Terminator 2. And, you know, coming hot off the heels of The Abyss, right?
There's a bunch. All right, so if you're interested in CGI in film, there's kind of like a hit list of here's the first, you know, each major first. So young Sherlock Holmes from 1985 has the first CGI character. It looks awesome.
Yeah.
It's a walking stained glass knight.
It's not supposed
really
to
cool.
And like you mentioned with Jurassic Park, it calls attention to the spectacle of it. Like, wow, look at this, is crazy.
It's literally,
yeah.
It's a dream sequence, so it's okay that it looks kind of glossy and weird.
Yeah.
And it's literally made out of glass. It's a very it's a smart use of CGI.
Very much so. Yeah.
And all those early examples of CGI are like that. The Abyss, it's an alien water creature. Terminator 2, it's a man made out of liquid
Terminator
metal.
2 gets to have it both ways. Because it is like, oh wow, it's a liquid person, but it becomes it feels like it's still occupying the same space as you and threatening. That's quality direction. This like crazy looking thing is still physically in the room. It's a boogeyman that can get you, which is very hard to accomplish with CG. So you know, the T-1000 frequently will become a corporeal, I think that's the term, tangible thing, like a stabbing, a knife or a stabbing weapon.
The spaceship from Flight of the Navigator. It's like a really cool reflective effect that was just a technique that they realized, like, oh, this looks better than, you know, any other type of shading.
And it's just basic reflection mapping, like in Mario 64 when you'd get that metal suit.
It looks great, but again, that's a spaceship that is kind of the singular focus of the movie, and it's supposed to feel like alien technology. So all my favorite examples of early CGI in movies do the same thing, which is basically, let's take something that is kind of dreamlike or doesn't follow the same physical laws.
Yeah.
And let's not make everything CGI. Let's just make one thing look kind of unreal.
Sure. Okay. We should have opened
the breaking point. The breaking point for me was Jumanji.
Jumanji's terrible looking. Jumanji looks real bad. Like, it looks real rough. No, I think that...
Look at it. It's got all sorts of really well-respected people working on the CGI, but that's the first movie I can think of. Not the first movie, but that was the first movie for me. I thought, they're trying to make something realistic. They're trying to make a ton of...
I know what an elephant looks like.
Stuff. Yeah, I've seen these animals before. and they just look weird and mushy.
What? Where would you put Men in Black in that discussion? Do you think Men in Black looks good? You're more of a Men in Black fan than I am. I like Men in Black, but I feel like you stand for it more than, relatively speaking. I don't think you have like T-shirts or something, but I think you like it more than me.
I do. I mean, I haven't revisited it a ton. There's other movies in the same like echelon that I prefer to go back to,
Like Independence Day,
like Mars Attacks.
Mars
I love
Attacks
the
is really
effects
rough
in
CG, but
it's rough, but it's so
it serves the purpose well.
clearly. It's so clearly going for Ray Harryhausen with the CGI.
Oh yeah.
Like they literally were thinking of doing it in stop motion.
I remember
until
that.
they're like, oh, there's just too much. Let's just do it in CGI and let's just go for that aesthetic. So it doesn't bother me at all in that movie.
Could you imagine?
I know. I love that movie. It's so mean.
It's so good.
Really
it's so good. Ryan, who's not with us today, he'll be on our next podcast, our next real podcast, once coined the phrase, we went and saw that movie at the Capitol Theater in Creamery, you, me, Ryan, and Julie Becker, I want to say. And when we walked out of the theater, he said, I love how Pierce Brosnan in this film is passive-aggressively handsome. Just constantly. Okay, so back to effects. We should have opened with this. What was the last time a movie's special effects made you wonder how they did it? Like, when was the last, like whether it was not realizing you were watching a special effect till much later, whether it was just watching the movie and expecting something to look bad and then it looked photoreal? Like, do you remember the last time that happened to you?
Not really. I mean, all right. So
you know my example. I bring it up all the time, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I kind of had that experience was the War for the Planet of the Apes, which is like those movies are treated by the creators as like, here is the golden standard for motion capture and character animation that actually feels alive, you know, in a
very
way
impressive. It's very impressive.
Yeah, it's very impressive. And I saw that third movie, Stone Cold Sober, and I was just sitting there just like zoning out at all these like ape faces.
Well, it begs you to study it. It kind of like dares you. Like, look, tell me when you can see the creases. Like, tell me when it looks fake. Where do you see the compositing kicking in?
And that movie has such confidence. It has really long takes. It has like very close camera work at times.
Because you could trace,
Sorry, what?
You could trace the effects technique of that movie back to like Son of the Mask, because the director of Son of the Mask made those cats and dogs movies, and they're kind of the same idea. They take an animal, they kind of like move its face.
Well, let's pull a deep cut. I sent you an article the other day about Robocop 2.
Great movie, underrated.
I don't like it overall as a movie, but
it's not Robocop 1, but come on.
Yeah,
it's
Robocop
like
1
I think Robocop 2 is a solid B. I think it's like an 8 out of 10. I like Robocop 2.
Yeah, it knows what it is. And the CGI usage in that movie amounts to the face of the villain after he gets turned into a robot.
Kane.
Kane. It's what's his name? Tom Noonan. The great Tom Noonan.
What a great pick for Robocop's nemesis, by the way. Tom Noonan.
Tom Noonan, yeah. He after he gets turned into a robot, the robot, which is traditional Phil Tippett stop motion go motion, which looks great, and his soul, I guess, becomes a little CGI face on a TV screen in the robot puppet. And I was reading this great like oral history of how they did it.
Yeah.
And it was arguably a mocap. It was like a hand puppet called Waldo that they could use to like move a face around and like animate the mouth, and then they'd go in to the mocap data and they would just kind of fuck it up by like editing like the raw numbers so that he'd be glitchy and like evil and stuff.
It looks like when people take like 3D models from video games and bring them into Steam Workshop and over animate the face or Mario 64, the opening when you like pull his eyebrows and move it and stuff. It's just fun. It's just fun to see this stuff. Yeah.
And then, but just like the janky pipeline of effects in those days, what they did was they then would render it about a second per frame, I guess, in a dark room with like cloth covering the windows and stuff, and a 35mm camera pointed at the time high resolution monitor. And then they would take that film, they transferred it to Laserdisc because the Laserdisc format could be paused cleanly and then advanced frame by frame.
Mm-hmm.
And then they gave the Laserdisc to Phil Tippett. Phil Tippett played it on a Laserdisc player that was wired into a 2-inch screen
The Sony,
from a Sony Watchman.
Yeah.
And then the screen was incorporated into the puppet that he
Do you
was
think
stop motion animating, and he just advanced the frame every time he took a new shot, and it looks great.
Do you think he determined the scale for the Robocop 2 Kane maquette off of the size of that Sony thing?
I guess it was just like the smallest CRT screen you could get at the time, and the whole like the robots, that robot I remember looking pretty kit bashed, like it's all sorts of craziness going on with it. But that kind of story just like is a lot more rare, I think, nowadays with the way you do it.
So we'll put a pin in me. I'll bring up the last time a movie really like made me consider how it was done. Let's put a pin in that. But you brought up where I wanted to bring the conversation at some point, which is I think a big reason so many people stand for practical special effects and camera special effects done with physical objects, whether it's a forced perspective or whatever, miniatures, is we see how this, we know how the sausage is made. Like you see the effort, you see the artisanal quality of the special effect on display. Like how many times have you gone back to a movie that you didn't grow up with from the 80s, 90s, or 70s, and there's an effect sequence, and out loud you just out loud say "cool," not because it looks photoreal, but you can see like, oh, they like put a fan under Chris Reeve so his hair flapped around. Like that's that's it, you appreciate it because you see the work put in. I do feel like that is a big reason why great CG you just don't notice, but it's very hard to not notice great practical effects, especially now when I have a 4K Blu-ray player now. I have a PlayStation 5 and I have a 4K TV. And when I watch movies in 4K, I can tell, even like Terminator 2, like it's very obvious when they do like rear projection work for exteriors of cars and stuff like that. And it looks great. Like I love the style. I love the color temperature. I love the approach, but it's an effect, it's not high enough verisimilitude that you get lost in it. And that can be done practically. Absolutely. Like we were talking about Darkman recently. There's some miniature work in that movie. I've seen Darkman probably 50 times, several times in a movie theater. And I only discovered last week when watching some YouTube compilation of interviews with the miniature experts on that movie, how many exteriors, how many sets in Darkman were miniature. They look photoreal, they're quarter scale, and they just did very boring things like here's like a soap factory, here's like a cafe Darkman lives above, here's like a car that gets blown up, but you just wouldn't you're not trained to see it as a miniature.
That stuff still happens. There are still miniatures in movies. I don't know how often it is, but like I remember finding out that like in Lord of the Rings, the amount of miniatures used in that movie surprised me because there's also a lot of CGI and painted backgrounds in those digitally painted backgrounds in those movies.
They still call them matte paintings when they're digital, right? Like they're still called matte paintings.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But you almost miss sometimes practical effects because you just kind of get in that mindset where you're like, yeah, it's all computers,
Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but that was 2 decades ago.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's been my kind of my example.
Lord of the Rings is old enough to drink, like
but I mean those movies were also like at the time when CGI was getting like really noticeable in everything.
I agree. I think that movie
CGI is kind of egregious in those movies at times.
Sure. Yeah.
Understandably so, because they were just such huge projects.
How else are we going to do X, Y, and Z? Yeah, like how are we supposed to do this like talking tree? Like, do you really want to make? Because in a movie made 20 years prior, that would have been the special effect. In the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it's just another scene.
Yeah. I guess I've been enjoying the Mandalorian's effects for the most part.
Yeah.
I know you haven't watched any of it, but it helps if you realize like, every episode is like $15 million and they're only 35 minutes long.
Yeah.
But the effects are very impressive for what's arguably a TV show, and they are happy to throw in practical effects and puppets now and then. They don't care necessarily about juicing it up too much. They do just let the practical
speak for themselves.
Artistry stand and speak for itself, which is a nice thing.
Do you think, now we're talking about Star Wars, but do you think it's possible to do its CG with how do I say this? Do you think CG can get that level of appreciation from the audience for noticing the artisanal touches that practical effects get. Like when we go back and watch Gremlins 2, we both love Gremlins 2. There's some effects in that movie that they don't look like, they look tangible. They have a level of threat and immediacy and like, oh, look how cute Gizmo is. I wish I could touch him. But we know, we look at him, we know he's like on green screen with rods moving him or stop animated, something like that. Is it possible for CG to ever, has CG ever done that to you where you've gone like, oh, I can really see the craft work done and I really appreciate it? Or is it just kind of, I feel like we take it for granted. And I think Star Wars, particularly the Lucas prequel trilogy, tried to do things with CG of that caliber, like the artificially changing takes and combining like the face morph stuff with Anakin and all that. You know what I'm talking about? Where they would like morph his arm on from other takes and things like that. Like I feel like that was you don't really hear about them doing that stuff in movies anymore because I think maybe movie studios know that if you know that they used CG to do stuff like that, you'll get mad at the movie.
Yeah, well, they've gotten better at it. I mean, the Star Wars prequels, easy as it is, as fun as it is to make fun of them, and there's plenty of just inexcusable stuff and the problems with those movies. But they are also like totally falling on the sword of being the first to do a lot of things. The second movie I think is one of the first, definitely the first movie of that level to be filmed digitally.
480p.
Yeah, it's not 480p. It's like
1080, right? It was 1080. I'm sorry. 1080. I'm sorry. Yeah.
But that movie only exists in 1080p. That's as good as a quality that Attack of the Clones is ever going to look because they just didn't have better cameras at the time that could shoot digitally.
They must be able to artificially upscale that stuff with AI or like interpolate like higher resolution models and stuff like that. But is it worth it? Because that movie stinks. Like, why? It's not restoring The Godfather.
But yeah, I think that is the case for most bad CGI in the 90s and 2000s.
Sure.
Is just developing it. Like, you know, it's unfair of me to shit on Jumanji too much because they were really trying to see if they could perfect like animals and daylight photography and I don't know, like all the dust that's getting kicked up in that movie. I barely remember a lot of it. There are cool like practical effects in it too, though. Like I think the spiders are practical.
Maybe I can barely recall it in my head, which is great podcast fodder. I know. So do you think? Can you think of a time you watched something that was computer animated that you really thought in the moment or after? Do you think it's possible in the moment to watch a computer animated effect these days in 2020 and beyond and have that same level of appreciation that you can have for a physical effect? Like I watched The Howling for the first time in October and it knocked me on my coal mining ass. I thought the practical effects were amazing in that movie. I wasn't expecting them. But do you think that can happen to you with CG?
It can, but it tends to be more of a style or aesthetic thing, I think.
Okay.
If a director does something that you just haven't seen before in a movie, a lot of the effects in Annihilation, for example.
Okay. I thought some of the effects were pretty rough in the middle.
Yeah.
Towards the end, I thought it got really good looking again. Like I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying about style.
It's not the realism. It's not the realism, but it's the just like imagery that they're creating in that movie.
That's a great movie to exemplify this then, because I think the stuff in the middle was trying to be tense and like physically endangering the characters, and it looked really phony to me. But towards the end, where it's just take in this creative vision.
When it gets more heady towards the end,
when it becomes like a 20-minute music video and it rules.
Yeah. And all that is like, I know it's just CGI. I'm sure it was very complicated to pull off, but like, you know, worrying about the logistics of doing that isn't necessarily the same in terms of like, you know, like setting my imagination off the way that it would be with an older set back in the day.
Maybe the only way a special effect can do that nowadays for us is like you and I love procedural F-bombs. Like when we're watching a movie and there's like one F-bomb in the middle out of nowhere, like Memoirs of an Invisible Man, it'll get you. But I remember seeing Birdman, and there's like one big special effects sequence in that movie. Have you seen Birdman?
No, I haven't.
It's good. But there's like one special effects sequence in it that you're just kind of not expecting. And that kind of pulls it off, but that's really not a testament to the special effect, but it looked real enough. It looked realer than a lot of comic book movies, frankly. And it's obvious how they did it. It's just like compositing. It's, you know, Michael Keaton on green screen doing stuff. But maybe that's like it's more of just like an absence makes the heart grow fonder kind of thing. Like if I haven't seen a special effect in a movie theater for an hour and then it happens, I go, wow. I don't know. I cut you off there.
I forget what I was gonna say. I don't know.
I tend to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. It is weird for me because I've talked to you about this, but when I was a kid, I was really into CGI. I was really fascinated by CGI.
What a fucking dork.
I know, like a 10-year-old.
Show them your book.
No, but my book?
Yeah.
Which one? I got two.
Either one.
One of them is okay. Well, if you're listening as a podcast, then this won't make any difference to you. But I have two books. One is called Special Optical Effects by Zoran Perisic, who literally, I think, helped Superman fly. And the other one is this big coffee table book called Special Effects, Creating Movie Magic. And both of these books are old. So this one's like From King Kong to Star Wars. This book details all the secrets. But that's exactly what I wanted, because this one basically goes up to like raster rendering.
Yeah.
It goes up to basically up to Tron and a little bit beyond. All the stuff beyond Tron is like demos, basically. It's just like, here's what it would look like if I rendered I don't know. There's like not a lot of good
computer animated dog. Tron. It'll happen someday.
Yeah. But I love these books because they actually get into some of the science that kind of gets glossed over.
Sure.
Nowadays, when people talk about old effects.
Yeah. The chemical process and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. But I don't know. I feel like studying how they would pull off a lot of this stuff can give you ideas for how to pull it off digitally.
Sure.
I often think about the way motion graphics were done. I'm obsessed with a lot of these old production studios that used to do a lot of commercials and logos and stuff. And before computers, or at least before computer rendering, they would do it all in camera with just like optical. They'd create shadow mats. They'd use computer controlled motion.
Yeah.
And
to
you
do
can
the math and
simulate,
figure out how to interpolate like from point A to point B, how to basically tween it. That's what we'd call it nowadays.
Yeah. And you can tween that, you can simulate that step-by-step process, and you can create shadow mats unnecessarily in like After Effects and stuff. And then you can add a little bit of wiggle to them and make sure that nothing perfectly lines up the way it would if you didn't put your hands in it. And you can actually recreate that vintage feeling to your effects now. I did that for the Mouth Dreams teaser.
Yeah. I
made sure that it kind of like flickers a little bit and there's a lot of grain and nothing exactly lines up. And I just love that feeling. And you can definitely, I don't know, I feel like you can definitely bring back a lot of the warmth and oddity of special effects without making life a living hell and going back to the caveman era, you just have to have an appreciation for the aesthetic.
Sure. I'm trying to think of anything I've seen. I mean, Star Wars is the best example I can think of where a recent film kind of hung its hat on using practical effects. I mean, there's Fury Road, obviously. And it was only episode 7 that I saw out of the new batch. But there was a lot of practical stuff in that movie. Like a lot of the BB-8 stuff, I assume, was like just an on-set, physical prop, right?
And that's like some of my happiest memories of the newer Star Wars movies is just kind of learning how they did stuff like that.
Yeah. To go back to the last time a movie special effect really knocked me on my ass. I'm a big fan of the Mission Impossible series. I was kind of late to the game. I saw the third one in theaters and loved it. Went back and watched the first 2, and I thought they were terrible.
Yeah.
The first one's better than the second one. It's got a look. It's got a great score and cast, but it's almost incomprehensible in my opinion. But the third one and on I think are fantastic, and those movies really like to. I keep using the phrase "hang their hat on." Those movies their entertainment is heavily predicated on the fact they're doing everything physically, like it's really happening. Like Tom Cruise is doing most of his own stunts because he's a crazy person and he's got a death wish and he knows it's entertaining, right? That's like a selling point for those movies. And yes, they do digital cleanup with some of his stunts. They remove wires and stuff because, of course, they're not going to dangle Tom Cruise off a 747 like hundreds of feet in the air. That would be stupid. But he's still doing the stunt. But I remember seeing Mission Impossible 3, And when I got the Blu-ray, I sat you down to show you my favorite shot in the movie. It was a special effects sequence where Tom Cruise puts on a mask to look like Philip Seymour Hoffman. Do you remember this?
Yeah, but I forget what the magic trick is.
So basically, Ving Rhames and Tom Cruise are are below the Vatican, and they're going to make Tom Cruise look like Philip Seymour Hoffman. And they're having a conversation about Tom Cruise's love life and how he should date Michelle Monaghan. Maybe he shouldn't. And as Ving Rhames is putting this Philip Seymour Hoffman mask on Tom Cruise, they're just talking casually about his love life. And I remember being in the theater and watching and waiting to see the effect kick in. You know, I was like waiting, like, okay, when is it going to be obvious that like when is he going to like sneeze or something and it becomes obvious like that it happened, right? Mm-hmm. Or when is it going to start to look like Play-Doh, right? And it was storyboarded and photographed in such a way that by the time my mind realized I wasn't going to see that moment because it was so well done, the moment had already passed me. It was like a good magic trick, a good sleight of hand. And I don't know if I articulated that well enough, but basically as I'm watching the scene unfold, I'm like, okay, when is it going to become like a polygon Tom Cruise? And it didn't. It had already happened. It was just very well executed. They basically reverse engineered the effect. So a camera at one point goes behind a vertical column to obscure Tom Cruise. And when it comes around, you're like, okay, is it still, okay, that's still Tom Cruise. It's still Tom Cruise. But as I've studied, and eventually it's clearly Philip Seymour Hoffman sat in the exact same chair. And they like matched the robotically controlled camera movement, if you can follow me. And they basically reverse engineered it, if that makes any sense. Like Tom Cruise was already out and they just like mapped him into this shot. So even though my mind accepted it was still him, it was already a fake Tom Cruise as they put the mask on Hoffman. So I kept waiting for the doubles to switch out and it had already happened. That was pretty impressive to me. That really got me. And I'm sure that stuff happens in movies. That same type of technique has happened since then. But I just don't know why I don't appreciate it as much. I just remember being in the theater and that knocking me over. I was so impressed by the sleight of hand in that movie. There's a lot of good digital stuff in that movie.
Yeah, that stuff's cool. I mean, that is like it's almost the execution of the effect that's impressing you more than the effect itself.
Yeah. Well, it's not like where that line's blurry though, right? Like, because it's like, are you saying like the use of the effect and implementation of it is the effect though, right? Like, it's not like
it's more that like what impressed you there is the seamlessness of it and your inability to tell that there's something fake going on.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the enjoyment I get out of special effects are not necessarily not understanding it, but just seeing it kind of writ large for the audience in a way that makes you feel like, they're really proud of what they're doing, even if you can guess what it is. Back to the Future 2 is loaded with
that movie's a great effects demo piece. It's really something.
It's really cool, but there's just so many shots where there's like two actors playing the same like character, and they're like, here, why don't I give you this? No, I'll give it back to you. Here, drink some of my water. It's all like stuff like that.
You've always had like a hair across your ass with those movies though. Like I remember when we talked about Back to the Future 1 once, you said you weren't that impressed with it. And I was like, you're like the one person I know that's not impressed. And then like later that day you tweeted like every joke in Back to the Future is just time travel irony.
I know.
Look, in the second movie, I mean, I know they really do make a big deal out of like, look, Michael J. Fox is handing Michael J. Fox a slice of pizza. Like they do that kind of thing. But there's some, but it's impressive.
I love Back to the Future 2 though. Back to the Future 2 is has a different set of problems.
I really like the second one. I think the second one gets too short shrift. I mean, the first one's clearly the best one, but like the second one's got like a lot. The technical showpiece stuff in that movie holds water. It didn't have to be that ambitious on a technical level.
Yeah. No, all my problems with the Back to the Future movies are like, I dock a point that most people wouldn't, I only saw the third one pretty recently and I really enjoyed it.
People misremember the first one as being a special effects tour de force, and it's really not. It's got like 5 special effects shots.
No, like the main effect in the first one is they created a 50s set and they were going to hang out in it for a little while.
The effect was they had a backlot.
Yeah. But I would argue that stuff like movies that have a custom set and spend a lot of time and make sure that you appreciate all the work they put into it.
Like Alien.
That
Yeah.
like Alien, I guess Popeye. I don't know stuff.
Don't.
But
There are no
no,
virtues.
but
to
like
Popeye.
that feels like the same thing as a special effects movie to me.
Okay.
I'm trying to think what's another good example of like um
Like a well
like
done period piece, maybe. Like
well done period piece, or Legend, which is
okay.
like all in a sound stage.
Yeah.
Right? Any big sound stage movie like a Sleepy Hollow or Batman or stuff like that. Even when there's not something that's arguably a special effect, if there's just a fake building, a fake city in the background, that counts to me.
So
And
to you, we're not necessarily talking about you. So you are very capable. I think I'm in this boat too. We're very capable of appreciating things that don't necessarily look real, but
yeah,
we appreciate the craft work on display. But like I keep circling back to this. Is it just? I guess it's just not that possible to really appreciate digital, not digital compositing, but just CG work. I hate calling it CGI because it feels like the most reductive shorthand. But it's the other thing everyone complains about. You know, is it? I feel like a lot of the appreciation for that stuff comes in retrospect. Like there was that great essay. I don't know if it was Every Film a Painting, but the one about Fury Road that was titled something to the effect of Mad Max Fury Road CG stinks except when it doesn't. And it highlighted all the CG in that movie that no one ever, because everyone walked out of the movie going, see, that's how you do it. You just do it with real cars and you actually endanger the actors and flip them over. It's like, no, you idiot. They just digitally rotoscoped out like all like the safety bags and stuff like that. Like like all those people were on wires. They're not going to like run over Charlize Theron. Are you stupid?
it's I don't know. Like that's the sort of thing that sometimes can obscure the practical work you're doing. Like I was talking about before.
That stuff can be a drag.
But like a movie like Fury Road, where they're clearly having the time of their life and they're really giving the stunt people and the car people all sorts of stuff to do.
Yeah.
And that has the opposite effect where you don't notice the digital enhancements, or you do, but you only notice the stylistic ones, like the weird color effects in that movie.
Sure.
And the unreal, like, stuff that feels more like a matte painting.
Sure. Do you can you think of a time, because this comes up every now and then as well, where a movie is, people will see behind the scenes photos or an early trailer where you will see something done practically, and then in the final film it is done digitally, like infamously that remake, the sequel to The Thing.
Yeah, I never saw that, but that is a whole sad story.
Yeah, the worst example I can think of was the Silent Hill movie. I remember being pretty excited because Christopher Gans was making it, or Christoph Gans, and people liked that director, and I had high hopes for it. I thought it had a really good trailer. I think Silent Hill was just a great marriage for cinema. And I remember seeing, it wasn't Fangoria, but I saw like in some magazine, like photos of some of the Silent Hill monsters on set. And they were getting circus contortionists to put on these artificial limbs and stuff to make them look like the monsters from Silent Hill, which are really unsettling. Jacob's Ladder, Tool music video caliber stuff. And then I saw the final movie, and it was just, there wasn't like a practical shot of any of the monsters I was interested in, and it really bummed me out. And a lot of people mentioned that online, like, hey, if you put the DVD in and watch the behind the scenes footage, they shot all this stuff practically. And then at some point, someone said, this just doesn't look that good. And people love to point fingers at suits and producers, but it could have been the director. The director could have said, I don't want to be laughed out of Hollywood for having these like costumes and puppets when I could have scary monsters. And at a certain, by that point, I want to say it was 2006, 2007. It was just understood that like, yeah, audiences will suck down mediocre CGI.
Sometimes I feel like it's a problem that older directors might have, where it's kind of like how your parents don't realize that you have the motion smoothing on your TV. You know that
the soap opera effect.
Like we were just talking about him.
Spielberg with Ready Player One.
Spielberg, or the guy who did like Beowulf and Back to the Future. Zemeckis.
Yeah.
I think Zemeckis has that problem where he is just okay with
mediocre visuals,
weird CGI characters that look like CGI, but they're supposed to be realistic, and maybe it looks realistic to him, but it doesn't look realistic to me.
I think Cameron's really good at knowing when to hold them and when to fold them with effects. I think Cameron's been really good over the years at knowing
Mhm.
this is as far as I can go. This is as far as I can go with the effects. Like, with the T1000, they weren't even initially sold on the idea of doing it with CG. They thought maybe
Mhm.
because they had done the Abyss, like, well, we did it on the Abyss. Can we do like
Yeah.
5 of those scenes instead of just one? And the Abyss was like a miracle that they pulled it off, as you know, that
Mhm.
effect sequence. It's amazing. But Cameron waited until 2009 to do Avatar, and the CG still looks great. You know, like I equate it with that first Avengers movie, where the effects in that first Avengers movie, not all of them, but there's a few set piece moments in that movie that look really good. Namely, the
Yeah.
Mark Ruffalo Hulk stuff, I think is still very impressive. And then you look at some of the subsequent Marvel movies, and they're just like, whatever. It doesn't have to look as real. Like, don't spend as much money.
Yeah.
It's not even the money; it's the time. You know, those movies are made quicker and quicker.
Mhm.
And they're probably like, I mean, I don't think they've actually shown Mark Ruffalo turn into the Hulk since that movie, right? Isn't that like a thing? Like we haven't seen like the
Yeah, I
moment.
don't know.
The moment. That's a
It,
cool. I love that effect. I love a person turning into a monster. It's cool.
it is.
It gets you drunk on the moment. You're like, ooh, here he goes. He's what part's gonna change next? It's like a bomb going off, you know. And the Hulk's great for that. So try
You're a
to
fan of the Ang Lee Hulk,
yes.
right?
And that movie is interesting in that it is the effects in particular. I'll stick to the effects because I think that movie gets
Yeah.
a lot of shit. I like that movie, but that movie, the effects are so technically sound. They're so researched and laborious, and like they spent years at ILM thinking, okay, if someone could jump a quarter mile and they had to be 10, 12 feet tall like the story calls for, what would their proportions have to be? Like they really went to those lengths, right? And then at the end
Mhm.
of the day, no matter how good the textures were, no matter how good the light sources matched the model, and the sight lines between Jennifer Connelly and Eric Bana's monster were, at the end of the day, he looked like a cartoon green man because his calves were like as thick as tree trunks, and he had kind of like a troll proportions. Like it was just straight up the creative lens. Like that. It wasn't a matter, I think, of processing power and people sculpting enough detail. It was just the design of that monster is just not what people are going to get into. It's not rock and roll enough. So in the subsequent Hulk movies, he got less and less green. You know,
Yeah.
he looked more and more like a dude that worked out. You know, and I do think,
Sure.
and that's not to like give short shrift to the Mark Ruffalo Hulk. I think it looks a lot like him. I think it's impressive looking. He looks like you can touch him. You know, which is a testament to how good it's done.
At times, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like shit like Iron Man and like Spider-Man and Black Panther, they're not as hard to do. You know, they're not as hard to animate. And I'm not a computer animator. I mean, I've done animation on computers, but I'm not a 3D modeler. But it's obvious that like flat surfaces with like reflections and based off known materials like steel and nylon are easier to emulate artificially than a human being. You know?
I mean, yeah. I mean, like people like us have been having this conversation for the last 20 years. And I'm sure every computer animator out there whose job it is to create these effects has conversations about our kind of conversations all the time.
They're going to be looking at
And
this. They're going to be waiting for that. Yeah.
yeah, the nerds aren't going to think this is realistic enough or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I get some sense of they are pushing as much as they can in the way the industry is set up and the way schedules are set up. I do think that they do try and make it look as good as they can, and I yeah, I don't want to like disrespect the actual people who
Oh,
create
sure.
these.
No, and when I'm talking about the Ang Lee Hulk movie, I'm just saying I think that is a great example, though, of they did a technically astounding job, and just
Yeah,
most people just were like, no. Like I don't no like no matter how well you cook, no matter how good your oysters are, some people just don't eat oysters. You know, like
right.
that's kind of what that movie is in a way. You know, some
It'd be
people,
heartbreaking though to like
yeah,
whatever amount of work they had to do in that, and then people are just like, "Ugh, it looks weird,"
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
I yeah. Well, to go back in time a little bit, CGI. What I've learned about CGI is that most companies that did it early on didn't do it primarily for movies. They didn't do it primarily for entertainment.
Advertisements.
The vast majority of the money they made was just like doing graphics for like sports broadcasts and
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
floating text and all that. There's tons and tons of reels. I
We watched a bunch of these together. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but there's one guy who actually does commentary tracks on his old materials. His name is Ed Kramer. Add CGI to your search because there's another Ed Kramer who's an awful person. Um, if you look up Ed Kramer CGI, you'll find his channel. It's just this guy going through his old tapes and mostly stuff he worked on or stuff that he curated for festivals and stuff. And he gives a ton of context behind like the computers that they developed to render these and like the corporate machinations going on back then and like layoffs and takeovers and stuff and just what it was like to be in the field and trying to one up your peers in the industry and all these different companies that would go on to get swallowed up by Industrial Light and Magic and Pacific Data Images and all the movies that they kind of graduated to in the 90s.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to see it go from like this very dry corporate stuff and learn like, oh, these are the guys who wanted to be creative and they had such limitations both in technology and making their clients happy. And then as time went on, like Hollywood began to recognize their creative potential and start to put it in
application
movies.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after a certain point, it just became like a huge industry. And like, they were, a lot of these guys were probably in, leadership positions after a certain point. But I don't know. It is very interesting to see it go from like extremely specific applications to recreating reality in some way.
You know what we should do
Yeah.
to wrap this sucker up because we're coming up on the hour
Sure.
mark. Neil, let's make a list.
Okay.
Let's make a list called the November 23rd, 2020 5 special effects movies you should watch. And I'm going to start off with The Gate.
That was my first one.
Ha! A movie a lot of people have seen from a mid-'80s child audience intended horror film with incredible practical special effects and stop motion animation.
Yeah, I think what happened with that movie was it was intended as kind of a low budget sort of Poltergeist knockoff for younger audiences. And then through some scheduling circumstance, the effects team had an extra like month or 3 to like prepare.
Yeah.
So that movie, despite just having like absolutely no actors, it's got Stephen Dorff, who was a child actor at the time.
Yeah.
And like on its surface just feels like kind of a lower tier movie, but then there's all these amazing like stop motion and forced perspective tricks in that movie that just look so good, so much better than you're expecting.
Okay. So that's our number 5. These are in no particular order. I just want to name 5 movies that people might not think of. Do you have one? Or do you want me to just name another one?
I'll take The Blob before you can get to it.
Yeah. Chuck Russell's 1988 unsung masterpiece. The Blob.
Yeah. That movie
does not get enough love, man. I love The Blob.
It's really fun. The effects in that are more of the gore variety, I guess. There's a lot of like gruesome, like stuff in it.
There's some pretty creative stuff. Like some of the chase sequences in the sewer look crazy good.
Yeah. The Blob itself, I'm sure they had to do like 5 different things to animate the Blob in various circumstances, but whatever they did, it was working. That thing looks cool. Just the overall feeling of that movie is really neat. Like the use of purple. Which you don't see a lot in horror.
I feel like we're just going to name a bunch of 80s like sci-fi horror movies. So like, I feel like in the spirit of the conversation, which is you and I being even-handed about CG having its place, a great aughts special effects movie. Does Cloverfield count? I really like Cloverfield. I saw it twice opening weekend, and it's probably
I missed it. I still have never seen it, and I would like to at some point, but because I missed that opening weekend,
it's hard to. It's so good, man. And if you're gonna watch it, you know when's a good time to watch it at like 4 a.m. right before sunrise. It's hard to articulate, but it's got a vibe. Okay, you know the scene in the first Jurassic Park when they're running through the herd. The kids and Corey's gonna kill me. Our friend Corey Tilton loves Jurassic Park. Grant's running with the kids.
Yeah.
That was an early mainstream use of motion tracking. They used a bunch of tennis balls and stuff like that, and they just ran with the camera, right? And then they later on, like Spielberg, they were trying to one up Cameron, you know, in the CG department. I think that was the arms race, but Cloverfield basically is that the whole movie, and I had never seen a movie like that. I think it came out in 2007, and I still think the effects are pretty damn cool, and I think I think it holds up, but I also was there, so I have like a real soft spot for it. But I do think educational merit applies here. I think you could watch it and be like, oh, this is like a really ambitious use of motion tracking and 3D camera placement. But there is some dodgy stuff every now and then. There's the big money shot from the trailer where the Statue of Liberty's head gets like thrown through a building, and it looks pretty cheesy. But I think the rest of it still holds water. I still think it's scary, you know?
Yeah. Special effects.
Did I buy you enough time?
I was trying to think. I don't know. I wanted to pick something older. I could just generically say like any of the Ray Harryhausen stuff.
What about the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde effect that we love? Or the one where it was a black and white film.
Yeah,
I think the movie was made in
the
the 30s or 40s.
The color of the lighting.
Yeah, well,
that's cool.
If no one knows what we're talking about, it was like I guess this was done in a few movies in like the 40s and 50s, where they would put a bunch of makeup on an actor, like say it was all green makeup, but the movie was shot in black and white, right?
So they could use a red light to hide the green makeup, and then use a
exactly.
Yeah,
and when they would dim the light, or they would pull a filter off the lens of the camera, the makeup would appear to come on or come off the actor. So there's this one amazing long take in an old Jekyll and Hyde movie. If you look it up on YouTube, just look up Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, amazing special effect, you'll find it. There's also another one where a woman turns into a witch. I should know these movies, but I'm not that well versed in vintage special effects. I'm sorry. But that stuff's pretty amazing. We have 2 more movies we got to come up with, and I'm trying really hard not to say Aliens, because it's another 80s horror movie that has incredibly good special effects to this day.
I was just flipping through my book for inspiration. I'll say Tron, which I just recently rewatched.
Yeah.
And that movie is known mostly for the CGI.
Yeah.
There is plenty of CGI in it, but like a lot of it is the full frame is a rendered animation, and you can kind of tell because it suddenly gets very simplistic.
Yeah.
It's cool, but the meat of that movie is all composited stuff and color effects, and it's all done in a very analog way, but just creating a digital style that meshes with the purely animated stuff.
Yeah.
It's just like they used a million different techniques, and even the just regular live action stuff at the beginning of that movie has a very specific look to it that most other movies don't. I don't know. I love how that movie looks. This was the first time I actually watched it on a nice TV in my life, and I was able to get over the kind of dry boringness of it that a lot of people complain about. I didn't feel it this time, because the whole movie, just like every new shot, is like beautiful and just miles beyond. I don't know. I think that movie looks better than Blade Runner even at times. It's doing something pretty different, but they're weirdly similar in terms of like the not exactly the mood they're going for, but like the world building, I guess.
I got one for you. It's going back to the late 80s, early 90s. I'm gonna give some charity to our friend Robert Zemeckis, who we dumped on a little bit earlier. Death Becomes Her has amazing visual effects. It's like,
sure it does.
I thought you were gonna say
Roger Rabbit.
Sure. Geez, how'd they do it, Neil?
Roger Rabbit.
It does. But Roger Rabbit's more of like the most of an effect versus like the best effect. Like it's obvious how they do it. It's very taxing, and I'm not trying to discount it. I love that movie. But Death Becomes Her has some incredible use of computer-controlled camera movements and such to give the actresses like holes in their bodies, and like
that's all I remember about that movie.
But it's really good looking. It's still very good looking. You still can't see where like the body doubles and like the puppets, like they would do like false torsos and stuff, and then have like Meryl Streep stand up and walk around, and they would have to do takes several dozen times. Meryl Streep did an interview about the movie saying she would never do an effects film again after that because she had to do dozens of takes of one shot where she like walked across a room and she had to hit a mark at this exact second or her head would hover off a puppeted body, you know, like, and it's seamless.
Yeah.
It looks amazing. Like I think
That must have been so hard for her.
I'm sure it sounds.
I know.
It sounds like it was a nightmare to make. I've seen that movie a few times, and every time the effects really do. You take them for granted. They're not like, it's not like seeing Godzilla or the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man show up. You're not thoroughly aware it's an effect half the time because you just get accustomed to the fact like, yes, Goldie Hawn just has a hole straight through her chest or whatever. I think that she was the one with the hole through her chest. But I think that movie's got some pretty amazing special effects. I don't think people bring it up often enough.
All right, let's think. The rough period of effects, which I think is the 2000s probably, right?
I mean, yeah, considering the Spider-Man movies are like the biggest movies from that time period, and they all look rough. The second one probably looks the best because Bill Pope shot it. But
yeah, I'm just trying to think like what from that era actually is good.
Harry Potter looks bad. The first one, by the third one, they looked much better. Even the second Harry Potter movie, just like way better looking. I stand by Superman Returns as having pretty good special effects half the time. The other half of the time, Warner Brothers literally told the director, who shall remain nameless, "Hey, you got to Spider-Man this up. We need more." There are on-set reports that they shot way more practical flying effects for Superman Returns and then replaced it with CG because they were like, well, Spider-Man makes money. So just put in like a digital Brandon Routh and have him like zipping around. And like, you can't really, it just doesn't work. Like, to go back an hour ago, it doesn't really marry well to that character. Like you should be with Superman when he flies. Even Zack Snyder got that right. But there's some, the airplane rescue in Superman Returns, I often cite as a pretty incredible special effects sequence still. Because a lot of it's just Brandon Routh on wires, you know, with a digital cape, you know, like, cause that's because they had wires on them, you know, like they if they could have done a digital cape with Chris Reeve, they probably would have, because then you could do much more intricate movement with your actor with the wire work. But I don't know. Would you have an example that's on the tip of your tongue?
No, I think it's kind of a trashy era for special effects. Yeah. Like the best examples you get are kind of mixed bag. You can always
like War of the Worlds.
Like, I don't even know. Like, I don't really, I mean,
you don't remember War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise, Steven Spielberg one?
I know, I remember it. I just don't remember much about like the.
It was directed well. It was directed pretty well. Like, there's some scary stuff in it, and it gets very painterly.
I got a good example, which is Dick Tracy, a movie you only really want to watch to see the special effects.
I like Warren Beatty a lot in that movie. I went as Dick Tracy for my first Halloween costume that I got to pick.
Nice.
When I was like 4, my parents said, "Who do you want to be for Halloween?" I said, Dick Tracy, because I thought he was really cool in that movie.
That's a old school ass movie. All the effects in it are effects you can kind of trace back to the early days of Hollywood, but it's also very much in response to the Batman aesthetic.
Yeah.
So
there were quite a few of those back then.
Yeah.
Dark Man's one of them, you know.
Oh, I thought of another one a second ago. Oh, I'm probably going beyond 5, but Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992.
I still haven't seen it.
Oh, that's got a whole bunch of effects that are in camera. Yeah, and they're really cool. That's a movie where they wanted to do things the hard way.
We should know. We should know the name of this team by now. I feel like we already came up with our 5. I think. What was it? It was. So. It was Ghoulies. No. The Gate. The Gate. Death Becomes Her. The Blob. What was the newer one? Cloverfield. I recommend it as like an educational like piece, like if you want to see like good like motion tracking. And what was the one you said that was like a companion film to Tron, right?
Tron. Oh, I thought we were doing 5 each.
Oh no, I just said we'll come up with 5, because if we did my 5, you know exactly what it's going to be. You know the 5 movies I don't shut up about. But
Rocky.
Rocky's got great. Rocky won an Oscar for best editing, which is a type of effect, because they filmed the boxing match in reverse. I'm not making this up. They filmed like not what you're thinking.
Not totally
Stallone, pull your fist away. Carl Weathers snapping his neck the opposite way.
I love that. Well, that explains why he talks weird too. Had to learn his lines.
No, but I mean, you get the idea, right? Like what they did, they for some reason, no one had ever thought to like Why don't we just like film the last round first and then take makeup off to make it, you know what I mean? Like it made sense.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up that do you know the name of the team that did the miniatures on Tremors?
Ooh,
because they also did Darkman. And there's a sequence in that the first Tremors movie where a graboid breaks into Michael Gross and Reba McEntire's basement, and there's a really good transition from them on set to the model work. It's like a whip pan, and there's just a little bit of motion blur to hide it. But the model was so dead on, like the lighting and the color and the proportions.
Oh, like the basement wall getting busted through. Is that the shot you're talking about?
It's not that. It's that scene, but it's not that shot. There's a scene where one of them drops a gun on the ground, and the camera whips down to show the gun, and then whips up to show the graboid on the wall, and it's going from an on-set like shot from the day with Michael Gross and Reba McEntire. In camera, it becomes the model work. It's really good. It's really good. Like that movie has another Gail Ann Hurd produced masterpiece. Tremors. She tended to make nothing but great movies. But that team, whose name escapes me, they did some damn good work around that time, if I do say so myself.
Nice. Yeah, I see there's a guy who worked on both movies on IMDb, but I can't find the name of the company.
What's his name?
Is it
Ryan Murphy?
I think he worked on both. Roy Kaniram. It looks like his last name is backwards.
Yeah. I'm gonna some people would
he
say
also worked on The Abyss.
Some people would say Forrest Gump is a special effects demo reel movie, but none of the effects look good. Here's a Neil and Kevin anecdote. You and I a couple of years ago were watching speaking of Back to the Future, when you would go to Universal Studios back in the day to get on the Back to the Future ride, they would show a ton of movies as you waited in queue to entertain you and keep you from getting too damn bored sitting there. And they were all like movies about how Doc Brown invented the time machine, and they would show Doc Brown going on adventures through time, and they would show
Robert Zemeckis made these.
And Robert Zemeckis made these, and it would be like Christopher Lloyd like shaking hands with Harry Truman or something, and you made the joke. You and I were watching it on YouTube, and you said, "Do you think this was like a demo reel test for Forrest Gump?"
It totally was.
It totally was. It was totally. It's like the Orville Redenbacher thing.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. David Fincher did the weird head pasting stuff, CGI stuff for Benjamin Button.
Yep.
And around that time, there was this creepy ass Orville Redenbacher popcorn commercial with a CGI Orville Redenbacher, and he looks really bad. And I found out years later that David Fincher directed that leading up to Benjamin Button to kind of test out the effect.
I love that you can't say Orville Redenbacher without, I can see the restraint from here over the internet. You're like thinking about the dance though. Orville Redenbacher.
The commercial literally ends with him saying like, "Yeah, you can eat my popcorn and it'll be great." Or, "My name isn't Orville Redenbacher."
Did they thought?
No, it's not. You're not that man.
Do you think they were like, listen, the dancing CG baby on Ally McBeal got a lot of headlines? Because
that was 10 years prior.
Was it? Ally McBeal was like 98, 99.
Yeah, Benjamin Button was late 2000s.
Yeah, but what was the Orville Redenbacher commercial?
It was around the same time.
It was like while they were making Benjamin
Button. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Forrest Gump. Well.
Yeah. Same screenwriter, right?
Yeah. Same movie, actually. I haven't seen Benjamin Button. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about with regards to special effects? Because I feel like I came into this hot. I really just wanted to do a quick demo of our podcast equipment. It seems like it's been working fine. I'm just going to dump this video file to the YouTube. And let me throw in one more thing while we're testing out OBS.
Okay.
For those of you who stumbled across this without knowing who the hell we are, this is Guaranteed Audio. And if you're looking at your YouTube screen right now on your phone, you will see our branding, the Guaranteed Audio Podcast, which is available on Apple Music, RSS feeds globally, and Google Play, which... do they even call it that anymore? Has Google changed that branding again? But yeah, we're available on all podcast platforms, and we'll try and podcast a little more often now that we can do it like this. Neil, you're back on screen, so you can stop scratching
Hey.
yourself. Yeah. But is
That's
there
a
anything
good
else?
effects movie.
What's up?
Freaked.
Oh yeah, I knew
Freaked.
one of us was going to bring it up. One of us had to bring.
It's not okay. The effects aren't good,
Oh
but
yeah,
it's
they
such a
are.
grab.
I think
It's
they're
like a
good.
good. Well, they're good, but it's like a grab bag of like, here's all the effects that we're not going to be doing in 5 years. So just like enjoy them real quick, you know?
A lot of them really are like blink and you miss it. Like when Keanu
Yeah.
Reeves shows up. So Freaked is an amazing movie. We've talked about it before. If you haven't heard about it, just watch it. Don't look up anything. Just watch it. It's fucking great. Funny as sin.
Oh yeah.
One of the absolute funniest movies I've ever seen. If you have a stomach for it, it's great. And I'm not talking about a stomach for a gore. There's just, there's a couple off-color things in it. It's 1991.
It's very yeah, it's Gen X.
It's Gen X. It's Gen X.
But it's fun as hell.
It's super funny. It's one of those movies that every now and then you forget it's rated R. So when it does something rated R, you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
But there's Keanu Reeves at one point shows up in that movie as a dog boy at a freak show. And he's talking about being a proud freak from the freak show. And then right after he finishes talking, he turns his head to the side and his leg comes up from off camera and he scratches the back of his neck and then keeps talking. And it's done so quickly and it calls no attention to itself. Like there's like an L cut. Everyone just keeps talking through it. Like you just kind of, the whole movie is humor like that. Like it's like Muppets humor.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's literally a sock puppet character. Oh, it's so funny.
It's so good. It's so fucking funny. Pardon my French. I held off on the swearing until the 11th hour of this podcast.
Good job.
What do you have a favorite special effects sequence in any movie? Because I mean, one of my all time favorites is the courtroom scene from Ghostbusters 2, because I feel like it was just like a tour de force of practical compositing, and it's got like the rotoscope lightning effect. I mean, the proton packs do that, right? But like the way they composited in like fireworks and various explosions and the ghosts themselves. Like I just think it's an amazing sequence. It's seamless. But do you have anything like that you can go back to from your childhood and be like, wow, this actually did hold up on a technical level?
Not
Jaws.
Not Jaws.
Jaws is great.
I don't know.
Yeah, you don't watch Jaws for the effects. You watch Jaws for the cast and the music. And oh wait, it's great. Who cares about the effects?
Yeah, I don't know. Like the opening of the Ark from Raiders of the Lost Ark is pretty cool.
Oh,
it's kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
Let's say maybe this is a cheat, but Rescuers Down Under. It's got some really ambitious computer assisted animation. The opening of Little Mermaid does that too. When a Mysterious Fathoms Below is playing and they pull up in the ship and they were like basically tracing a CG model as far as I could tell, right? Look good.
I don't know if yeah. There's a bunch of that. I don't know. Yeah, that stuff's always kind of neat. Yeah. We've talked about Rescuers Down Under a bunch face to face. But that movie
pretty good movie
is on Disney Plus. Yeah, you might not think to revisit that one, but if you look at it next to the prior movie Little Mermaid and the following movie Beauty and the Beast, you will realize that the animation in it is better for some reason.
I have often said that Little Mermaid is like up here. It's like a incredible looking movie. Like it's almost too ambitious. Like the animation technique. I'm not an animator, so I can't speak I don't have any expertise in this arena. But it seems to me like there's everything in the kitchen sink was thrown in to make the Little Mermaid look as good as it does, whereas Rescuers Down Under is a little more refined. Like they knew just what to use in each scene.
Well, the thing about that movie, and yeah, this counts as a special effects tidbit. That was their big pilot for their digital animation system, which allowed them to digitally scan in all the drawings and color them digitally and manipulate them and fly through them in a digital way. Prior to that, they were just using camera animation stand stuff, and they had very sophisticated camera equipment, but they were testing out doing it all digitally in 1990, which is pretty early for that. And it was such a big deal that they actually kept it secret for a few years until like the cat was out of the bag in like 1994, I think, with Lion King. But I think they kind of went back to the traditional ways for Beauty and the Beast, partially at least.
Beauty and the Beast, a looker. I haven't seen it in a long time. Is it up there? Like, because I always feel like Little Mermaid was underappreciated for how good looking it is. And I thought like the subsequent Renaissance movies were good looking, but not quite Little Mermaid.
Yeah, no, Beauty and the Beast looks pretty good. It's a similar problem with Little Mermaid, where some of the character animation is just kind of mushy and up to the not quite up to snuff.
They didn't realize how
Yeah,
long a shot was going to be. They're like, Jesus Christ, we have to keep drawing Ariel's face.
yeah. Actually, no, it's funny now that I've like watched all these Disney movies in like pristine HD and they all look really great. Um, I realized that although I guess financially Little Mermaid saved their bacon, they were doing better animation on Black Cauldron and Great Mouse Detective and earlier in the 80s. And those movies look awesome and kind of just get the short end of the stick from I don't know, like just like the lore of Disney's comeback, you know?
I there's something about Little Mermaid. It's so ambitious. The scale of it, the action scenes. It's cute, but not that cute compared to Great Mouse Detective. Like Great Mouse Detective has a different type of artistic license with its action scenes. Little Mermaid's more like these human beings are in peril. They're going to drown, like that kind of thing. Like the lighting of like when Eric gets blown up on the ship into the ocean and the fireworks are going off in the distance. And there's like the warm, like tungsten glow hitting the back of his head. Like there's something very special about the way that movie does water. There's nothing lazy about the look of that movie. It doesn't hurt that I watched that movie 100 times growing up and I have such a soft spot for it. The Alan Menken music's cool. So good.
Yeah, it's really good. You should check out Black Cauldron though, because that's kind of like it's like all the serious stuff from that just in one movie. It doesn't have. I mean, it has like a few obvious like joke characters that are in the whole movie.
Yeah,
but there aren't any like big sequences where you're underwater and like there's a million cartoon fish like making goofy faces. It's nothing like that. It's like on the more of the dark fantasy side, and it's got such pretty animation and backgrounds, and it's very widescreen too. It's I don't know, that one's cool. I like that movie a lot.
Well,
and some cool special effects.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're getting into just like, hey, isn't this movie cool? Like that's where that conversation. Yeah. Movies are cool, but I'm glad we found a few things from the last 15 years to celebrate in terms of special effects, because I think it's very easy to just. It's so hard, I think, to appreciate things that are done digitally in terms of like the sheer amount of hours and talent put into those effects. But I think one last thing to bring up. If you haven't seen it, I think a really poetic marriage of practical and digital effects worth checking out, and it didn't make it into the final movie, was the test for Spike Jonze's Where the Wild Things Are.
Oh yeah.
That got out before the movie. Remember that?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of bittersweet because that to me is the easiest. That to me is what you're always sort of hoping for with movie special effects. Like, please do as much as you can in camera, and then do the impossible stuff with a computer. And like the first few Iron Man movies, that seemed to be what they were doing. Like they would actually put Robert Downey Jr. in like football pads that looked like the suit, and then they would fill in the gaps, so to speak. And then by like the third one, it was just like, he's not even there. He's literally not even on set. Like he's
literally phoning it in. Yeah.
It's insane. Like, Jesus. But I don't know. I'd say, check that out. The Spike Jonze Where the Wild Things Are special effects test on YouTube. I think that's a good clip to seek out if you haven't caught it already. I wish we had more of a,
That might be smoothed over a little bit by the fact that it's like a 2009 YouTube upload, maybe.
Yeah, that's the Vaseline on that lens. That's doing it a lot of favors. Yeah, if we could see it in 4K, maybe it would look so good. Well, we didn't have much of a format to go on, so Neil, I thank you for doing your research. I haven't had a lot of free time the last few days, and doing this test, I think, will make our future podcasts much easier. Join us next time when we'll be doing a traditional episode of Guaranteed Audio with our co-host Ryan Murphy and special guest Shannon Strucci. I'm sorry, Shannon. We're going to be discussing the 1992 flop Memoirs of an Invisible Man, directed by John Carpenter and starring Chevy Chase with Daryl Hannah and Sam Neill. A movie I kind of like, and that's why we're going to watch.
We'll see how that goes. We might end up talking about other movies too.
Yeah.
I have a feeling.
I'll save it for that show. I kind of like that.
Well, maybe we'll talk about other John Carpenter movies. Yeah, probably.
We'll probably have to talk about Die Hard. We'll probably have to talk about Ghostbusters. There's a few things that factored into that movie. But okay, folks, thanks for tuning in or listening. Let's see if I can do this properly in OBS. I'm going to try and do our outro. Neil, what do you usually say at the end of our podcast? You've said it like twice.
Fuck off, audience.